I'm a professor at McGill University in Montreal, and was planning to give this talk at the September 6th meeting, Degrowth, but for technical reasons that was not possible. So I'm going to give the talk now, and I hope you find it of interest, and will be in touch with me if you have any issues or things to further discuss. So I'm really going to talk about the issue of taking evolution seriously, and about how this framework can provide an ontological or metaphysical basis for the degrowth movement. I'm very influenced by the work of Thomas Berry in general, and this book that I have on the screen now, The Great Work in particular. And Thomas Berry says in this book that the great work of humanity is really to rethink the human-Earth relationship, and that this is really an urgent task that must be undertaken immediately. And he develops really an alternative metaphysical conception of the human-Earth relationship, very, very different from the standard that has come to us through the Bible, through Aristotle, through Descartes, Newton, and Bacon, and people like that. It's a kind of complete rethink of the nature of reality in a way, and the human place in it. I can't recommend this highly enough. And if you work in the universities, you should take a look at chapter 7, which really is a very brilliant critique of what we do in higher education. So what we have now, is, I think we all know, is we're in what's at least informally called the Anthropocene. And this seems like, if it is an era, some geologists dispute this, it's really off to a bad start. Even in September of this year, we've had massive hurricanes stronger than normal. We're very likely, almost certainly, into a situation of compounding sea level rise, massive loss of other species, millions, hundreds of millions perhaps of refugees and moving as a result of climate change, sea level rise, loss of farmland, loss of cities, and so forth. And yet we trying to manage the current situation with the same concepts that brought us to this disaster. So Thomas Berry's put forward a notion that he calls the Ecozoic, a vision for the future founded on mutually enhancing relationship between humans and the global commonwealth of life. He has a great sentence that I think summarizes a lot of his thought. The world is not a collection of objects, but a communion of subjects. When I first read this sentence, I couldn't really figure out what it meant, but it dawned on me later on that it was almost self-evident. When I have a farm, I have a house with a septic system. If I plant a maple tree near the septic system, it will not too long in the future disable that system because it'll be seeking the nutrients from the system. So just generalize this idea. There's really cognition of a variety of sorts throughout the living community and perhaps even beyond. We don't know that. So good kind of brief introduction to this idea was given to me by a friend of mine, who said that in the Mohawks in upstate New York, were basically that section of what's now New York State was settled by the Dutch, and the Mohawks are said to have figured out that the Dutch were idiots when they said they wanted to go into the forest to be alone, right? So being in the forest is to be in a community. It's not to somehow, they're not all objects. So Berry's point of view, which I strongly agree with, is that we can't think of the principal human-Earth relationship as one of use. So where we're trapped kind of now is between two great worldviews, the ones that come from the ancient sources of our civilization, the Bible, including coming up through the Muslim texts, and the Greek and European, the older Greek sources from Aristotle in particular, and then of course from the European Enlightenment. So that there's a scientific synthesis of the last 500 years with a major deflection point around 1800, when the idea of evolution started to get some currency, is another worldview, and mainly out of step with the older worldview from Greek and biblical sources. But unfortunately, in the academy, much of what we teach is still in worldview 1. So in my view, this has helped to bring on the Anthropocene by having a quite inaccurate picture of the human, or pictures of the human-Earth relationship. So this may be the controlling image of Western culture in a way, that that we are special creatures made in the image of God, that the rest of us, rest of living beings, are inherently inferior to us. John Locke, for instance, referred to all the other animals, I believe, as the inferiors. And this is an idea that is undergirds what I come to call the Emancipation Project, the notion that humans can be separated from and thrive separate from the Earth and the other living creatures that are on it, or that we should subordinate all those creatures to our will, which we have unfortunately been reasonably successful in doing. Now this is an astonishingly frank picture of the idea of progress. The picture was painted in about 1880 or thereabouts, and the name of the painting is American Progress. And you can see here that American progress is defined by driving off other species and the lesser peoples, right? What we're thought of as the lesser peoples. In this case, in the case of the United States, it would be what we mistakenly call Indians, but in Canada and other countries, of course, they have different names. But progress is the displacement of these people and the takeover by basically European agriculturalists. So there's another point of view that has a lot of scientific validity at this point, which is that whole picture of the universe and the human place in it is really quite wrong, and that the universe should be thought of as a process of continuous creation and destruction. This is a picture from the Hubble Space Telescope, and it's basically depicts the mechanisms that the cosmos uses to create new stars. So from this point of view, we really need to reground our conception of ourselves and take on board the idea that the universe is ever advancing into novelty, that the universe is in a process of continuous creation with no plausibility that humans are distinct from or better than other species, that we're kind of part of a commonwealth as opposed to a hierarchy. So looked at from this point of view, the Earth is an island of complexity in an entropic universe. But the universe as a whole is running toward simplicity, but on the Earth and in perhaps other planets, things are getting more complex due to the way they handle heat. So, for instance, on the Earth, we have what we now call what we're now calling dissipative structures that dissipate and degrade the continuous amount of sunlight arriving on our planet. And this kind of depicts a major task, if you like, or major component of the universe, which is that the universe is in essence in a process of self-cooling, and that it looks for ways to do that, such as hurricanes or living beings. So what happens as a result of the second great worldview is that most of the assumptions, or many of the assumptions from the older worldview, are basically become implausible. They're not maybe one by one refuted, but they become not a thoughtful way of thinking about reality. So we now think, NASA thinks that there could be a large number of planets capable of supporting complex life. On the modern evolutionary view, there are no chosen species, there are no chosen people, and there's no privileged or chosen gender. And on this view, at least in my interpretation of it, more people is not an intrinsic good. Doesn't mean that more people isn't a good, but it isn't. But just another person per se is not necessarily a good outcome. It depends on the circumstances in which he or she is born. in the new view, there's no divine mandate that humans own the earth. There's a unity of mind and body. There's no immortality, no personal immortality. There's no particular holy land, right? I think, in my view at least, would be that all land is holy, but the notion that there's a particular place on earth which is holy and the rest of it can be thought of as a resource only is a profoundly mistaken and tragic idea. There is no exogenous rescue in the new worldview. There are no ex cathedra moral systems such as the Ten Commandments, and women are not born of men but men of women. So it's a quite different take, and our sort of task ahead in doing the great work is to rethink the moral, conceptual, intellectual foundations of our whole society. A big job to which very little attention is being paid. So what are the obstacles of reconstruction? What could we build up as an ontology for the degrowth movement? And what's getting in our way? So one thing, I'm just going to give a brief list of obstacles here. Well, one is vertical religions, right? Religions which hold that the sacred is somewhere else. So the earth is to be morally neutral or degraded, and the holy is to be found somewhere else. So the Lord's Prayer is a good example of this. Our Father who art in heaven. So the sacred is somewhere, some distant place, right? Where we live is banal, ordinary, degraded maybe. And in the biblical creation story, when the fall of man occurs, fall of humans occurs, it also degrades all of the earth. Right? So we're in essentially profane surroundings, and this is so what we're trying to do is alter these, make them more commodious, and but the problem is the religious dualism that the sacred is somewhere else. Another problem is the English language. The English language has two categories: people and things. So if you want to say something that would be more consistent with, let's say, Cree ontology, and you want to say it in English, it's very difficult to say because the multiple ways in which the Cree understand agency are not easily captured by the structure content of the English language. Another big problem, of course, is what universities do and teach. We teach basically the things that are very much in the old worldview and have not really taken evolution seriously. They're in the arts and humanities. It's not completely true, but general, the scientific synthesis and the scientific revolution of the last 60, 70 years is a sideshow at best. Another problem is the notion of the sovereign person and the nation state. There is no such thing as a sovereign person. We're all embedded in energy and material flows, in flows of germs and other things, in the flow of water and food and everything. So notion of independence that's in the idea of sovereign is really not an effective and useful idea. And the same thing is true of the sovereign nation state. We understand now that the earth is really a set of complex interactive systems, and the notion that there's a border between any particular set of these activities and others is yet another illusion. And then we're cursed, and this has been really a very unfortunate development in ecological economics, in my view. We're cursed with a pre-scientific ethics. We use terms like ecosystem services and natural capital. These are words that can't find any grounding in the coevolutionary model. So it's just a few examples of these things. The Lord's Prayer I already talked about. Just notice the deep dualism in this idea. The English language is just a very crude, sort of blunt instrument looked at from this point of view. Liberty. So we think of liberty our thoughts about liberty are really quite outmoded. We think that we're free to do anything we want, provided that we don't harm someone else. This is John Stuart Mill's argument, basically, in the very famous and seminal essay on liberty. But the problem with this idea is that once the carbon sinks are full, there's they're in a null set, right? Everything we do affects someone else, and particularly in the energy intensive cultures of North America, we directly and routinely violate the golden rule without any concern over that. So what's happening is as the global ecosystems are becoming overwhelmed, where liberty is bringing about its own demise, because more and more of the excessive use of energy from the north spreads around the globe. We are destabilizing the institutions which make liberty possible around the globe, and as ways I talked about when we talked about the characteristics of the Anthropocene, likely massive migration, for instance, would be one example. So we have an ethical systems which are really insufficient. Right? Our ethical systems are principally or almost entirely pre-scientific. We haven't adapted our thinking in our behavior within those systems to the scientific discoveries of the last several decades. We have an unworkable governance. Things are divided up into nation states, and for reasons I talked about just a few minutes ago. This is not true. It's not. There is no sort of separable nation state because of the way the energy and material systems of the Earth work, and it's also quite an arrogant notion that the governance is by we the people, implying, unfortunately, that the social contract is limited to persons, whereas there are many reasons for thinking that the conception of the moral community should be very substantially broader than this. Yet another really unfortunate way of conceptualizing things that is widespread in the academy, and this is from a introductory microeconomics book, is a circular diagram, familiar likely to most of you. And what's missing in this picture is what is usually found in most cheap hotel rooms, which is a plug and a wastebasket. So the lack of a wastebasket turning out to have fantastically negative consequences for life on Earth, because it's how we happen to overlook until quite recently, and still completely ineffectively, the problem of saturating the capacity of natural systems to absorb carbon. So we really, this is a tragic, deeply tragic mistake, perpetuated to this day in many so-called good universities. Here's another problem. We think that we're the only thinkers, right? But you know, we are members of thinking communities of a huge variety of sorts, types, and capacities. So I think one of the things I want to contribute here, more or less toward the conclusion, is that we need to rethink macroeconomics. And I've taken some concepts from Musgrave, particularly the concept of the public household. And I'm altering this to think about the Earth household and what macroeconomics would look like if it thought about things from the point of view of the commonwealth of life, or the community of life. And so the functions that Musgrave allocate or talks about in the book, in 1950, it's a book, I don't remember the title right this moment, is distribution, allocation, and stabilization branches. So in terms of thinking about the Ecozoic, these would get reconceptualized. So the distribution branch would be concerned with fairness to all species. The allocation branch to the preservation of basic social functions, right? So we might have allocation branch would deal with public services such as hospitals, but would also be concerned with the health of lakes and things like that. So we would appropriate money or develop policies that would be beneficial to lifers, to a large set of the things that make life possible. And an example of this is that we should be, macroeconomic policy would aim for the stabilization of Earth's life support systems. The reduction in acidity of the oceans would be a legitimate macroeconomic policy goal, right? And then I added to this Musgrave list an additional one that I think is crucial in our time, which is a restoration or atonement branch. That we really have laid waste to a formerly very, very healthy, much more healthy and beautiful place, and we should adapt, as opposed to private initiatives and public initiatives, a restoration of it and a hopefully at least a partial atonement for our pretty dreadful behavior. So here are some examples of goals for macroeconomics in the Ecozoic. One is, of course, and I have a pun here under allusion to the Marshall Plan. We need to have a Marshall Plan for the planet. Right? So we should have universal family planning and education for all girls and boys. The idea of just educating girls, I find amazingly short-sighted. Men are, particularly teenage boys and young men, are often problematical, right? As having been one once, and so we should educate and civilize boys while we can. And also, there's an issue of if a lot of women grow up and become educated, and the men are generally not educated, it's going to be lots of social problems. We need to enumerate them. For diet, we should go to direct production of protein. There's no reason to run plants through cows, pigs, and chickens. In order to get protein, we can get it directly through responsible agriculture, with vast improvements for the life of the whole commonwealth of life. Like much cleaner water, much less erosion, much less forest cover loss, things like that. And we have to really very severely damage the oceans by overfishing, by dumping trash of all kinds in them, including carbon dioxide, of course. The goal of policy in the framework I'm talking about would be to restore the oceans to their former abundance and magnificence. So lastly, I just want to talk about how religious experience fits into this whole way of thinking. Religious experience, I think, is often regarded as something that's kind of ephemeral and dubious, and to be had maybe by a few monks and things like that, but not for most of us. But I think this is really quite a big mistake. We now understand from at least some of the science on this that religious experience is a pretty common state of affairs in humans, maybe other animals too, we don't know. Apparently enabled by chemical and electrical changes, temporary chemical or temporal changes in the brain, not necessarily always short, and sometimes these experiences, of course, are life-changing. Many versions of this experience consist of a feeling of peace and holism, where the experience of the skin-encapsulated self is suspended, and that we tell the stories of that experience through various metaphors found in many religious texts. And in this experience, the unity of self and universe is revealed. In this sense we get is the world is not mine, but it is me. And this phrasing I'm taking here from Cormac Cullinan, and I've been very much influenced in the way I think about this by my colleague Robert Nadeau from George Mason University. So take a look and read this fantastic quote from Einstein. So religious experience is to open ourselves up to the reality of our embeddedness, to open ourselves up to the notion that we are, or to the idea and the experience of living in a vast, beautiful, and somewhat dangerous also expanding universe. So it's a form of cognition. It's not to be pushed off the map, it's to be centered around a quest for a new and far better human-Earth relationship that we really have to do. This is a brook trout stream in the mountains of Maryland in the United States. Thank you for your attention.